So recently I did a video on the iPhone 6 and how Apple knew that the phone was more likely to bend. I talk about the Touch IC defects, I talk about how Apple handled this, and I talk about why you should care. In response to the general outpouring from people talking about bendgate, there was one YouTuber who does a lot of videos in Apple products, who many of you have requested I respond to in the past. He did release a video in response to the general outpouring of news articles and YouTube videos on bendgate that I think needs to be addressed, because there's a lot of information in this video that, in my opinion, is really bad. Let's start off with the general premise of the video. I'll play this clip, and we go from there.
Now, I'm sure all of you are very excited to see what's coming to iOS 12 at WWD. Wait, what are we talking about? Talking about this thing? Again? The iPhone 6 from 2014?
This is an excellent criticism. Why is it in 2018, a full 3.5 years after the iPhone 6 came out, that we're still talking about it? Why are we still stuck up on one hardware flaw from a device that came out in 2014? Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to have him answer it for you right here.
So, when Apple knew they wanted to have a larger display and a larger form factor that we still resemble to this day, a very reliable design, a very successful design, a lot of people prefer this type of phone build to the fact that we're still releasing phones in 2018 that are modeled after the basic design of the 2014 iPhone 6 Plus.
In this clip, he tells us exactly why it still matters. He says that that design from 2014 was so popular that even modern smartphones are based on that design. And if modern smartphones are based on an improper, poorly engineered design from 2014, then that poorly engineered design from 2014 is just as relevant today as it was in 2014. The purpose of memory is to not repeat our mistakes. Our mistakes as consumers, continuously purchasing products that are poorly supported and poorly engineered, and the mistakes of the company designing the product in a way that's going to allow it to easily fail. These are mistakes, and the way that we overcome our mistakes are by acknowledging them and remembering them so that they do not happen again. This is just as relevant today as it was 4 years ago because it hasn't been acknowledged. Now, you may think, well, that's just being paranoid. There's no way that this is going to reoccur, right? Well, you be the judge of that. I'm going to show you two videos. One is from Jason at STS Telecom, and the other is from Jessa Jones at iPad Rehab. I'll leave links to their channels below. Thank you very much for the permission to use these video clips, by the way. The first video I'm going to show you is iPhone 6 and 6 Plus flex base damage. Jason is going to show you what happens to the board.
M1 over here evaporated this time whenever I ran my iron across it. Now what I'm running into is that pad, even if it seems to be connected, is not connected. I mean, it's just not. If I set my multimeter to beep mode, I'm relatively confident. If I were to check between, let's say, if I were to check between M1, and I'm going to have to heat this up now before I clean this. If I were to check between M1 right here, at this pad that's now missing, if I were to check continuity between there and this pin right here, I would get a sporadic beep. That's my assumption. I don't think I would get a solid, steady beep. I think I would get a really, really shitty connection.
That's what a flexion-based defect looks like on the iPhone 6 and iPhone 6 Plus. Now I'm going to have Jessa Jones at iPad Rehab show you what a flexion-based defect looks like on the iPhone 7 with something called the audio IC, a chip that's on a similar spot in the board. You tell me if you notice anything familiar, if there's any kind of uncanny resemblance in these two flaws between the iPhone 6 and the very similarly designed iPhone 7.
All right, so let's see here. If, before we even kind of mow down these balls, as I look at this under the microscope, let's look. So we can see this one right here. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Look at that movement. Right there. That is not cool. That is audio IC classic defect. That movement, see how that pad should be part of the board. It should be firm and solid, just, it's kind of cemented and one with the actual logic board. It should not have any movement. It should not be loose like that. So if you look at, kind of any other ball, if I kind of poke, here, poke, kind of poke at other balls, I can't move them. And then when I poke here, look at that, I have motion. It's just barely hung on there. In fact, it will come off as I break. All right, and then I'm going to look down here at this guy. All right, that guy is on there. That guy is our next one of concern. He is okay. That guy is seemingly okay as well. All right, so on this one, it was a classic case. Right now, that dude is just crazy loose. And that is what was causing this phone to boot loop, almost certainly.
What you're seeing here is the result of a company that does not have any incentive to admit wrongdoing. The customers hold themselves accountable rather than the company that poorly engineered and designed the device accountable when it breaks. As a result, the company never has to reflect on their mistake, and the company never has to say, this was designed poorly. How can we design our products a little differently so that this doesn't happen again? Because their customers never held them to task for this issue, they were allowed to just release the iPhone 7 with very similar defects to the iPhone 6. And this is going to affect a lot of you. If your audio and voice memos are not working properly, or your microphone and speaker are not working properly, and then a couple of weeks later your phone just starts to randomly boot loop and doesn't turn on, guess what? That pad's lifted. The iPhone 7 has many of the same flexion-based defects as the iPhone 6. And it's because we never acknowledge the faults with the iPhone 6. That's why in 2018 this still remains important. Now, many of you may say, well, why don't you acknowledge this in other phones? What about the Nexus 6P? You're biased towards Android. Well, that's a great question there. Why don't I point this out when it occurs in devices like the Nexus 6P? Great question. The reason I don't is because the community at large has already accepted that the Nexus 6P is a steaming pile of shit. We don't need to go there. We know that that doesn't work. The users of the product understand that it was a piece of crap. The reviewers now understand that it's a piece of crap. The people on YouTube that do durability tests have, by and large, said that it's a piece of crap. It has been accepted. Nobody is going to design a phone identical to the Nexus 6P again and expect it to be successful. And if they do, well, I feel bad for their stockholders. There's no reason to go back because there's no legions of people defending that terrible, god-awful design of that garbage smartphone. However, when it comes to the iPhone 6, even 4 years later, people are saying that that was a fine design. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it, which is why we need to discuss it. Because if we don't discuss it, it's going to repeat itself again and again and again. Now here he's going to bring up another good point. Watch. There's people on YouTube that have tried to break the phone. They've tried sitting on it on camera and doing stuff like this to it in an attempt to make it not work or bend. And these are the results.
If you actually tried to bend the iPhone 6 Plus in normal use just by using it like a normal phone, you result in really hilarious YouTube videos that I remember watching when they first came out back in 2014 that are just hilarious. In fact, you have to check this out. Look at it. My pocket bends test.
Look, that person sat in the phone, and the phone still works. So what's up with this whole Touch IC bending nonsense? Well, that is not how the flexion-based damage occurs. And I'm going to bring up a basic example that you don't need to know about soldering. You don't have to understand how PC boards work, or flexion-based damage, or small solder balls, or any of that stuff to understand what's going on here. So I'm going to play some music out of these Shure headphones that I have. They have replaceable cables because I'm careless and I know that they're going to break over time. So I'm going to play some music through them. And you can see that each side of the headphones works. Now I'm going to pull on these headphones as hard as I can and as fast as I can in an attempt to break the wire. Because as anybody who's ever used headphones knows, sometimes one of the channels goes out and gets a little finicky and then eventually they don't work at all because of breaking at this point at the end of the connector. So watch what I do here. I pulled that as hard as I could. Now I'm going to plug these back in and I'm going to play both sides and we're going to see if they still work. Okay, here we've got the left side. Works. And here we've got the right side. Still works. If I were to look at you and say that these headphone wires never break because, look, I can even do this to them and they'll still work, would that be valid? Would that make sense? No, of course not. Now, why is it that they still work? Well, the reason they worked is because the damage that's occurring at the ends of the headphones is flexion-based damage. Very similar to what happens in the iPhone 6 with the Touch IC and the iPhone 7 with the audio IC. It's not that you're going to break it by doing that. You're going to break it by doing this over and over again. I don't break the headphones by doing this. I break the headphones by going back, forth, back, forth, over and over and over again. It's not rip that's going to break them. It's a little back, forth motions over and over and over again. Now, pressure on headphones is going to break them over time, but it's not the pressure at the immediate point. If we were talking about a cracked glass screen, that's a different story. You can break a cracked glass screen just by going pop and hitting it as hard as you can or as quickly as you can. That's how you're going to break it. But flexion-based damage is the opposite of damage that occurs from cracking a glass screen. That damage on the PC board is not going to occur because you sit on it. It's going to occur from back, forth, over and over and over again over the course of several weeks, months, maybe even a year. To even try and compare and contrast immediately sitting on it to the damage that's going to occur over a year of picking the phone up, of putting it down on a surface that may not be flat, of putting it on a dock somewhere, of picking it up, of putting it in your pocket, taking it out of your pocket, shoving it into some car holster to use it as a GPS. All the normal use that's going to flex your phone back and forth is, in my opinion, completely ridiculous and completely disqualifies this individual from having any say in the topic. It makes it clear that they have no experience in the repair business and no knowledge of how PC boards or solder ball-based defects occur over time. This type of flexion-based damage is very common, and it is common, surprise, surprise, in Apple products. I showed you how it happens in the iPhone 6, I showed you how it happens in the iPhone 7, and I show you on a regular basis how it happens in the A1398s with the U8900 chip, where you can see how the solder cracks over time. And when you take those boards out of the machine, you can always see that even if the casing is not broken, that the boards get to be a little bit flexed over time. This is how those defects occur. To be very clear here and to hammer the point home, you do not have to have a phone where the body of it looks physically bent to have flexion-based damage. Even if I bend the phone a little bit and it bends right back into place so that I can't physically see a bend, that doesn't mean that the board inside has not suffered damage as a result of that flexing. Many of the phones that Jessa at iPad Rehab and Jason at STS Telecom and Michael Oberdick at iOutlet and Chris Long at BNC Connection C that have these types of issues are not phones that are bent. They're phones that look perfectly straight on the outside, but that have very flexed boards from the very weak casing on the inside. This is an issue that we see on a regular basis. And I understand if somebody wants to say, well, that's not the case, but who do you think sees more of these phones? A popular store in the middle of Manhattan with tens of thousands of customers, or a guy that does videos in the new iOS from the middle of nowhere? I'll let you decide and be the judge of that one. Next up, we have another great question. An iPad will bend if you break it over your knee. Why are people not talking about the iPad breaking if you bend it over your knee, if it'll break and bend the same way that an iPhone will? That's a great question.
Smartphones go through all kinds of durability testing, and yeah, does it shock anyone to know that larger devices that are thin are easier to bend? Why is no one talking about iPad bendgate? Taking a giant 10.5-inch iPad and just kneeing it down the middle? Yeah, that could bend it.
Great question. The reason that we're not talking about iPhones bending is because in the real world, the world that you seem to be concerned with and testing for,
the thing is, guys, I don't think Apple thought that was normal wear and tear. When Apple's testing their smartphones and testing their durability, I don't think they're doing this. They're using calculated measurements to see what average everyday wear and tear would do on the iPhone.
in the real world, the world that you seem to be concerned with and testing for, they don't bend. And they don't break that way. They have broken screens, bad charge ports, broken buttons, Touch IC popping its way off the board, pads breaking under chips because of flexion-based damage in the PCB. Not a problem in iPads. Never been a problem in iPads, and the way the engineering seems to be going is not going to be a problem into the future in iPads. Why are you not talking about a problem that never occurs? Because it never occurs. Do you even solder? Have you ever even opened an iPad to look at the PCB? I'm guessing no, because if you did, you'd notice that they virtually never have flexion-based damage. They have problems with TriStar chips going bad. They have problems with PMICs going bad. Occasionally, they'll even have problems with CPUs going bad. But flexion-based damage is not something that happens in an iPad. Can you break it if you break it over your knee? Probably you can. But you're not going to do that in a regular use case. And as you've said many times, you are concerned with talking about regular use cases. So why are we even discussing something like that? Why is it that you discussed the Note 7 battery and not the HTC One S? Because the Samsung Note 7 explodes. Why is it that everybody likes to talk about the Death Star hard drive and not this? Because Death Star dies. We are talking about products that have actual problems. not products that we're just going to make up problems for and pretend to have problems for the sake of making terrible analogies. One of the other points made is that people don't complain about this type of bending and touch failure on the Samsung S6, which came out at a similar time to the iPhone 6, because virtually nobody bought it. It didn't sell well. Like, nobody bought that thing, so there's virtually nobody to even complain about it.
Other two devices broke at a much higher load.
Or would bend at the same measurement, but no one cares about them, no one notices because not that many people bought them.
I looked around for a while, and the lowest estimate I could find for sales of the S6, the absolute rock bottom, was 45 million. 45 million is not nobody, and 45 million is not a low number. I will admit, it is a much lower number of Samsung S6s that sold than iPhone 6s that sold. I personally don't understand why anybody bought a Samsung S6. In my opinion, the Samsung S6 is a terrible, terrible smartphone. They took the S5, they took away the liquid resistance, they went from USB 3 to USB 2, so you could transfer to your SD card at slower speeds unless you swapped it out of your phone. You had to deal with the fact that the battery was sealed in the phone, and they took away the liquid resistance. There is no kick in the balls greater than sealing the battery in and taking away the liquid resistance, since the liquid resistance is the primary reason most companies claim that they seal the battery in, even though the S5 proved you could do that without sealing the battery in. And there's no SD card slot. They literally took all the worst features of Android and all the worst features of the iPhone and put it together into one expensive flagship device, put TouchWiz on it just to make sure that it's extra slow and gives you that lovely Samsung lagging experience, and expected this thing to sell for $600. It's no wonder that it sold terribly. I'm not defending the S6. I'm not saying the S6 is a phone I would have bought. It's not a phone I would have recommended you buy. It's a phone that I think whoever at Samsung had the idea for this needs to be beaten in the nuts with a baseball bat for. Not literally, just in case there's any lawyers watching, but you get the idea here. I think it was a terrible phone. In spite of my opinions that it's a terrible phone, they still sold 45 million. 45 million sales is enough sales to be able to determine whether a product has a widespread serious problem. Even if 0.1% of your users are having a problem with that device, that's still going to show up in thousands and thousands and thousands of users who are going to make noise about it on the internet that every single one of this device seems to be having this problem. And when you have somewhere between 4,000 to 100,000 people complaining because of a design flaw, that's going to be some noise, even if it's in that 0.1 to 1% area. The point here, plain and simple, is that they sold over 45 million Samsung S6. That was the most conservative, low estimate I could find. And at that number is high enough that if there was a flaw that was inherent in even 0.1% of those devices, people would be screaming bloody murder at Samsung, and this issue would be widespread. The reason it's not widespread is because it doesn't happen. For whatever reason, the Samsung S6 was designed in a manner where it does not have these flexion-based defects. Maybe they used underfill under the chips like every other competent smartphone manufacturer does. Maybe they decided to make it so that the board can handle some flexing inside. Maybe the casing itself absorbs it. Maybe it's not, the board is not screwed into the case as hard. Maybe the case doesn't flex as much as the iPhone's does before it bends. I can't tell you exactly why because I don't have all the equipment here to do an advanced test on that. However, what I can tell you is very clear is that A, Samsung sold enough S6s to see that this was not a problem inherent in that device, and B, it's not a problem inherent with the S6. Samsung makes a lot of devices with a lot of problems. They had crappy memory in the early Samsung phones. The Note 7 had a little problem where it would explode every now and then, and they took away the SD card slot in the S6, and they have this bullshit lagging Samsung Experience TouchWiz crap interface that they put on top of all their phones. They have this edge nonsense on the side that I can't stand. The one thing that I will give to Samsung and the one thing I will happily give them credit for is that there is no flexion-based damage in any of their recent smartphones. And in my opinion, since it has not been an issue in any of their recent smartphones, it is completely irrelevant to bring it up when talking about the iPhone 6. The next point he makes is that Samsung decided to release a phone with a glass back around the same time that Apple decided to release the iPhone 6. Apple knew the iPhone 6 was more likely to bend, but so what? Apple knew that, but Samsung definitely knew that their phone was more likely to crack now that it has a glass back, right? So that kind of evens it out.
It's kind of like blaming Samsung for saying, Samsung knew that when they switched to glass backs, more glass backs would shatter.
Well, no. Cosmetic differences are not the same as functional failures. If I drop this phone and the back glass cracks, it looks worse. However, I can still receive phone calls, I can still access my data, I can still use every application on the phone just fine, even if the back glass cracks. However, If I have flexion-based damage, that means that I can no longer use the touchscreen. I can no longer access my data. I can't use any apps. I can't make any phone calls, and I can't access the encrypted data on the phone that doesn't even have an SD card. How is that even remotely similar to the same case? That's like saying you're a restaurant that serves really greasy and nasty food, and you didn't tell me that that's likely to make me fat. Okay, fine. That's on me, whatever. I should know that if I walk into Checkers and get a bunch of burgers there every day, that I'm going to become fat. However, you can't put lead in my food and not tell me that you haven't put lead in my food. There's a difference between making me fat and making me dead. That is something that you should disclose. There's a difference between making a phone that's slightly more likely to have a crack in the back of it and making a phone that's very much so more likely to be dead and unusable and not work. These are different things. I would much rather have a Samsung with a cracked back than I would an iPhone that the touchscreen doesn't work on, or an iPhone 7 that is boot looping as a result of the audio IC pads coming off of the board. That is a completely ridiculous analogy that does not make any distinction between cosmetic and appearances and then functional issues and death. One point that he makes is that he launched the Twitter poll, and a lot of people don't seem to put their phone in their back pocket. So even if putting the phone in the back pocket does wind up causing these issues, most people don't even do that, so it doesn't matter, right?
The put in my pocket bend test. Oh, but what about people who put it in their back pocket? Because that's really common, right? Actually launched a Twitter poll not too long ago because I was curious. I don't really put my phone in my back pocket like ever. That's just weird. It makes sitting down uncomfortable. But I could be wrong. So yes, this is not the entire world poll. This is a random sample of people on Twitter. And notice in this poll, I didn't say iPhone. This was not limited to just Apple users. This was any smartphone user out there. I asked you guys, where do you store your phone? And at 89% we have front pockets, 7% we have back pockets, 4% we have purse or bag or whatever, something that's not the back pocket.
Wrong. The thing with YouTube is that it's a mostly male medium. If you've ever watched a video interview between an interviewer and Jordan Peterson, 99% of the time, what they will do is say, "Why is it so many men watch your videos? Why is it so many men watch your videos? Why is it so many men watch your videos?" And the reason that that question is often asked to try and slander him is to try to use the demographics of YouTube against him. Whether or not you like or hate the guy, I could care less. But the point is, YouTube is a fairly male domain. And that's what happens with Jess's channel, and she's a woman. That's what happens with my channel, and I'll post the stats up above. And that's what's likely happening with his channel. And for whatever reason, it seems to be women who put the phone in their back pocket. If you've ever seen people who put their phone in their back pocket, just pay attention to where they put the phone back. You may notice, like me, that most of the people that you see putting their phone in their back pocket tend to be female. And YouTube tends to, for whatever reason, have a large male audience, the same way that Tumblr, for some reason, seems to have a larger female audience. Particularly tech channels by young men. I can't tell you why it is that mostly men seem to watch these channels. I'm not Roosh V. I'm not some raging MGTOW. I'm just the guy that likes to talk about his clock signals, his pee-pee bus, and the fact that it's G3 hot. I don't know why it is we have such a low female viewership, but that's the reality of the case. And if the same is true for him, I would imagine that most of the fans on his Twitter are people who came over from his YouTube channel, which would just so happen to mostly be men. Which is why you have those results of very few people saying that they have their phone in their back pocket. Now, side note, I've actually had this discussion with Jessa, and maybe this should be a rant for another video. I find it particularly funny that a company that virtue signals so much about diversity and inclusivity happens to have so few female engineers. Jessa has said many times that if there was even one female engineer in the room, or just one female while they were designing the iPhone 6, that they would have made sure that it lasted being put in the back pocket for a few weeks at a time, because women tend to see no problem with putting a phone in their back pocket. If that company had even one female engineer on this design team, this likely would have never been an issue at all. That's an interesting side note, but let's go on to the other parts of the video.
Yes, there were papers in a court filing that said Apple knew the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus would be more flexible, but my guess is that they were already in production and they weren't going to stop all production just because they thought a couple of YouTubers were going to go online and tell everyone that if you put all of your pressure in the back of the phone, covering your fingers on the display and pushing with all your energy to just bend it in half, no, that wasn't a priority for them.
These are the customers that I've been servicing over the last 10 years that I've had my business, since before you even started puberty. I know exactly who these people are, and they're not people that can afford to break their phones for the sake of a YouTube video. Myself and my staff are the ones that have to explain to every single customer that comes in with those flickering bars in the screen why it is that their $800 flagship device that they purchased from a $400 billion company gets crappier support than the shittiest, cheapest Android phone from China that doesn't break when it flexes in your pocket. I'm the one that has to explain to them how a $400 billion company can come up with better engineering or design, and we're the people that have to explain to our customers how it is the $400 billion company manages to get away with it year after year after year and continues to produce the same products with the same defects generation after generation without any consequence. So don't you tell me that all the people who have this problem are just YouTubers that are doing that to their phone. No, they're not. They're the people that stock your shelves. They're the people that provide your and cook your food. They're the people that pick up your garbage. They're the people that stock the stores. They're the people that help society run. They're the workers. They're the normal people. They're not people that have money just to buy up phones so that they could do this to it so that they could get YouTube views. And by saying it, you're discrediting and insulting every single person who has been fucked over by this company's actions. You do not know how these phones work. You do not know how they are put together. You do not understand anything about PC boards, repair, design, engineering, and fuck, you probably have never opened one. In my opinion, until you've learned how all of these things work, you shouldn't speak on them and you should probably shut your mouth. That's it for today, and as always, I hope you learned something.